Since the beginning of UFO research, certain locations have become hotspots for unexplained sightings. Where? Why? What do they have in common? One organization is dedicated to finding out. It's the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, and its former international director has been studying hotspots since 1965. Join us as Paranormal TV offers an insightful one-on-one interview with MUFON's John Schuessler.
A UFO hotspot is any place in the world where UFOs recur on a frequent basis. There have been UFO hotspots for years and years. In the 1940s, 1946, 1947, we had UFO hotspots in the southern United States and in the northwestern United States. During the 50s, there were over atomic installations, generally over atomic installations. 1952, mostly over Washington, D.C., although the whole nation was covered by UFOs. The 1960s, we had them in Michigan and various other places. 1973 was a major flap in the whole eastern United States. From then on, we've had just shorter, brief periods of high-intensity UFO activity. The more modern era of UFO hotspots would be Gulf Breeze, Florida, in the 1970, 87, 88, 89 time frame, really ending about 1992. Since then, we've had less frequent and less intense ones, but they still occurred in various parts of the country. They never seem to reoccur the same place once they're finished. Many people don't realize that UFOs are not seen only in the United States. They're seen all over the world. There are hotspots all over the world. The UFOs have come to certain spots because of what's going on at the time. One of the things that seems to stimulate UFO activity is a major disruption in the Earth. We had a major project in Texas in the 1970s where they were building a nuclear power plant. At that time, they were running heavy equipment night and day, moving a lot of earth, and UFOs were seen virtually every evening by the heavy equipment operators, even by the foreman of the operation. That's an example of a major disruption. Lesser things seem to be when a major event happens. In wartime, we had sightings over Korea during the Korean War. Going back to World War II, we had Foo Fighters. Since then, we've had activity just preceding major events, and we're never sure why that is, but even the 9/11 event was interesting because it seemed to be a major disruption of things at that time. Airplanes quit flying, but we still had UFOs flying. There was a fire tower being built up in Yakima, Washington some years ago, and while that was being built, they would see in the evening several UFOs come in and fly around like they were observing that fire tower as it was being built. Now, not knowing what it was, it could have been a radar installation, a fire tower, or anything at the time. But numerous people reported from as far away as 15 miles seeing these things come and circle it and go away. That has intent. There are two scales that we really go by. One is high strangeness, and the other is high credibility. The high credibility relates to the witnesses or witness. The strangeness events to the type of event. A light in the sky is not a strange event, but something that flies in close to an airplane and zips around it, or affects vegetation, harms an individual, something of that nature is a high strangeness event. And if that is then witnessed by police officers or military pilots, airline pilots, someone of very high credibility, you gotta say, that's interesting to us. There are several factors involved in reporting of UFOs. One is the factor that people don't like to be made fun of. We call it the giggle factor. This came from way back in the 50s when we had a major rash of UFO sightings in 1952. The CIA convened a panel of scientists, fed them a number of, you might say, slanted reports and say, what do you conclude from this? And they concluded that we ought to leave it alone. And so that was kind of released to the press as, well, stop talking about UFOs because it's all silly season stuff, which wasn't the truth. Fortunately for us in the Mutual UFO Network, we are finding more and more people just don't care anymore. They've been shocked by enough things in their lives now, especially since 9/11, that they come out in droves to tell us about UFO cases. We're hearing about cases that people kept quiet about for 20, 30, 40 years. And now they say, I just got to tell you, I'm not going to be quiet any longer. Very recently, I spoke to an airline pilot for a major airline. He was a training pilot. He trained other pilots for this airline. And one of the pilots mentioned to him something about a UFO, and he started talking about it. The first thing he knew, he was called in for a psychological evaluation and a thorough investigation of his being on flight status. And even though they found him totally sane and totally a good guy and no problems whatsoever, they still took away his training status for other pilots. And that happened recently, not in the 1950s. So there's still this connotation of something is wrong if you see a UFO. So naturally, people are not going to talk about it. That makes it a major sociological problem.